In today's video, I'll be talking about the progression of semiconductor technology from 1975 to 2023. And I want to give you a little bit of a background history about the transistor, which I'll be talking about today mostly. So before they had the transistor, they were using something called a vacuum tube. And this was invented in 1904. And this was used in computers, the first computers, which was made in 1945, like the ENIAC. And this ENIAC computer used a lot of power. It used about 18,000 vacuum tubes and cost about $487,000 in 1945 dollars. So today's money, it'd be about $6.2 million. It was about 30 tons. Took about 1,000 square foot of space. And the vacuum tube was, it functions as like a transistor. So in that it could be turned on and off and turned into binary code, which computers understand. And vacuum tubes could also be used as an amplifier. Vacuum tubes can be used for CRT screens, which was used during the 1950s when television was invented. And in the 1980s also when CRT monitors were used. So vacuum tubes are very big, so that's why computers like the ENIAC were huge, and they weighed a lot and used a lot of power, like 130 kilowatts of power. And another computer that came out in 1951 was called a UNIVAC. This had about 6,103 vacuum tubes, weighed about 7.6 tons. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars back in 1951. And these early computers were used in like census data. They were also used in computing artillery tables and stuff like that, artillery charts. It's much faster to use a computer to do that than using a human being crunching numbers. And the next breakthrough that came out in computing technology was the transistor, which was invented in April 12th of 1950 by William Shockley of Bell Labs. And transistors are much smaller than vacuum tubes, and a lot of industries grew out of the transistor, like portable radios, which a lot of Japanese electronics firms took advantage of, like Sony. They produced some of the first portable transistor radios, which could fit in your pocket. And before that, we had big radios, which use vacuum tubes. I saw some of these things back in the late 1970s and early 1980s when I went over to my grandparents' house. They had an old radio from, I guess, in the 1940s and 1950s. It was a huge radio. It was a big radio. You cannot put that in your pocket. And so basically, shrinking down this component for the computer really revolutionized computing technology. But the next breakthrough that came out was something called the integrated circuit. I think this was invented by Robert Noyce at Fairchild Semiconductors. And the biggest advantage of having an integrated circuit is that you could put many transistors into a semiconductor, basically chip. So as you can see in the diagram, in the picture, there's like 8 transistors in that one integrated circuit. It's much better than just having each integrated circuit in a printed circuit board. It would enable you to have a more powerful computer in a smaller package, in other words. And as computers evolved, they got smaller and more powerful. And we still use integrated circuits today. And integrated circuits are great in that we could pack a lot of transistors into a semiconductor chip. And today we're going to start out with in 1975. And the technology of computers is based on how small you can make the transistors, how many you could fit into a semiconductor chip. So we have something called technology nodes, which is how thin the transistors are in diameter. So in 1975, we have the MOS 6502, which was a mass-produced semiconductor chip, and had 3,510 transistors at 8 micrometers. So micrometer is 1 millionth of a meter. So a human hair is about 18 to 180 micrometers in diameter. So let me check if that's true. I don't know exactly. Okay, it's about 17 micrometers to 181 micrometers. That's the diameter of a human hair. So 8 micrometers is definitely smaller than the human hair by 2.13 or 22.5 times less diameter than a human hair, which is pretty amazing. The MOS 6502 was used in a lot of early computers, like I think the TRS-80, the Commodore 64, the Commodore 128, the Apple II. It was used in video game consoles like the Nintendo Entertainment System, Atari 2600, Atari 5200, Atari 7800, TurboGrafx, NEC TurboGrafx 16 or PC Engine, using a number of computing devices back in the late 1970s to the 1980s. And this was an 8-bit computer, basically. And it had 16-bit address width. So the way you find out this number is simple. It's 16 2 to the n power to 16 bits, 2 to the 16 times bytes. So you get 65,536 bytes times 1 kilobyte divided by 1,024 bytes. So you get 64 kilobytes. So the maximum amount of memory you could have for a MOS 6502 was 64K. And you also had the Zilog Z80, which was used in a lot of different computers and video game consoles and other electronics as well. And this had 8,500 transistors, and there was 6 micrometers, smaller than 8. And as you can see in this chart, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So by 2002, it went down all the way to 0.09 micrometers. And today, it's about 0.005 micrometers or 5 nanometers, so which is a lot smaller. And as you can see in this chart, the number of transistors for CPUs has been going up exponentially. And Moore's law states that computing the number of transistors doubles every 2 years. So from 1975 to 2023, according to Moore's law, the amount of transistors that we should have in a processor is 58.9 billion transistors, or about 11,396,011 times more transistors compared to 1975. We're pretty close to that, but not quite. The best processor we have now with the most transistors is something called the Apple M2 Pro, which has about 80 billion transistors. So I guess we're about 18.8 billion transistors short. But however, there are processors that have 3 nanometers, which I'm pretty sure would have more transistors than the Apple M2 Pro, which is based on the 5 nanometer process. And as you can see, as for the transistor nodes or the process, it's been going down exponentially. And it's like limits in calculus. It's going to zero. It's going to almost zero, to infinity, I guess. I don't know how much they could shrink a process down to. Maybe they could shrink it down to 1 nanometer. After nanometers, I think it's whatever. What's after nano? Is it peta? Pico? I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe they could shrink it down more, but that's pretty darn small. As the transistor nodes get smaller and smaller, the CPUs get more powerful, and you could see that computers have been getting smaller and more powerful. If you compare the ENIAC computer of 1940s to a Commodore 64 of the late 1970s or early 1980s, a Commodore 64 or Apple II was more powerful than a ENIAC computer of 1945, which took up a size of a room and weighed 30 tons and cost a lot of money. You know, you could buy a Commodore for maybe, not sure exactly how much they cost, maybe $400 back in 1982 or something like that. It's a heck of a lot cheaper than $487,000 in 1945 dollars. So we also have the Motorola 6800, which was used in a lot of arcade boards back in the 1980s, early 1990s. Used in a number of very popular computers like the Commodore Amiga series, I think the 500 and 1000 series. It was used in the Sharp X6800. It was used in the Neo Geo arcade and the home video game console. And a very popular processor at about 68,000 transistors at about, let's see, 3.5 micrometers. So transistors are important in that computers use binary codes, and this is an example of a binary code. This is a sequence of numbers. So I think on is 1, off is 0. So computers use a series of binary numbers to produce different stuff like alphanumerics, like characters and numbers, and also can be used to use graphics and audio and all kinds of stuff, digital signals. So this is the language that computers understand as binary code or ASCII code. We could call it ASCII as well. That's another type of programming language, which is a lot more complicated because the first computers didn't have a high-level computer programming language, like, for example, something like BASIC, or Fortran, or Cobalt if you're in business. If you're in the scientific field, it'd be Fortran. Today we have different programming languages like C++, C#, all kinds of different languages. And computers understand binary code, but higher level computer programming languages enable you to use English to write software, which was a lot easier than learning ASCII code to program a computer. That would be immensely more complicated. So computers today are faster, smaller, easier to use. The computer that you have in your pocket, for example, your smartphone, is probably more powerful than a Cray computer which existed back in 1985. Even a supercomputer back in 1990 or something, in 1995 or something. Your desktop computer probably has more power than a supercomputer of the 1990s. So that's how much power being able to shrink down the nodes enables you to have a much more powerful processor, much more computing power in a smaller package. And the supercomputers of today, which I think they use parallel computing, they use a lot of processors that are used together in parallel. And supercomputers today are very powerful. The desktop computers that you have right now could probably do gigaflops. The supercomputers probably could do petaflops or something like that. Giga is a billion, peta is like a trillion, I think. That's the scale of computing. So more powerful computers, we could do more stuff, right? Just look at some of the games that you saw back in 1978, like for the Atari 2600, and compare that to the games of today. I mean, if anybody back in 1982 saw a game like Assassin's Creed or Wolfenstein, the New Colossus or something like that, or Cyberpunk 2077, they would be pretty amazed if they ever saw any. If you were able to go back in time and show someone that, right? They'd be amazed. The amount of technology that we have now is spectacular. Basically, it's almost like, and to get this technology node, it's very complicated. That's why a lot of CPU companies that produced CPUs back in the late 1970s and 1980s and even 1990s dropped out of the race. You had a lot of different competitors producing CPUs back then. You had MOS Technologies, you had Zilog, you had Motorola, you had Texas Instruments, you had a Cyrex, you had so many different companies producing chips, you know. You also had AMD, of course, and Intel. And today we don't have a lot of companies that produce CISC processors. We have just two main ones, like AMD and Intel, and you have a company like NVIDIA that produces graphics chips, which are also very powerful, which enable you to do a lot of stuff in the scientific field, like modeling and stuff like that. And it's very useful in artificial intelligence to have such powerful processors and GPUs and stuff like that. So over the past 48 years, technology has improved greatly, you know. And we could do a lot more stuff with our computers today compared to what you could do with them back in, like, let's say 1985. because back in 1985 I had an Apple IIc computer, 86 I think. I had an Apple IIc computer. Very limited in what you could do with that computer. I didn't have a modem. I didn't even have a mouse for it. You know, it was just I used it for just very few things. The most I used it for was I played some Apple II games. I used it as a word processor. I never used it as a spreadsheet because I was only a kid. And I guess businesses would have used it as a spreadsheet, but you would have had to have a lot of floppy disk to store the stuff, because hard drives definitely weren't standard feature back in 1986 or 87. You could get a modem for it, but the modem speed was very slow. I think it was about, I'm not sure, 1200 baud or something, 2400 baud, which is very slow, which can't do very much with it compared to the broadband internet that we have today. We can do a lot of things with it, and even if you did have broadband internet back in 1986, the computers, the processing power wasn't adequate enough to like process all the information. It would have to, the technology has to move in unison with each other. So if you have a large hard drive, you would have to have a pretty powerful computer to process all that information, right? So today we have hard drives that are as big as, I don't know, 16 gigabytes. You could buy 16 gigabyte hard drives. Not gigabyte, I'm sorry, terabytes. Or like 16,000 gigabytes. So we could do online banking. We could shop online. You could order stuff on your smartphone, or a cab, like from Uber or Lyft or whatever. Food. You could stream movies. You could work from home even. And you could do a lot of things with computers today compared to the computers that you had back in 1986 or the early 1980s or even the 1990s. You could do so much more. That's it for this video. Let me know what you think, and